Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for the patience as we call this meeting to order. It's a regular council meeting of March 24th, 7 p.m. As we call the meeting to order, we just like to acknowledge that we hold these meetings and do our business in the traditional territories of the Coast and Strait Salish peoples. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen people known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt or Kasapsum nations, and their historic connections to these lands and adjoining waters continue to this day. Up first, we have approval of the agenda. Can I have a mover and seconder? Moved and seconded. Any changes or suggestions? All those in favor? Any opposed, none opposed? That carries. I'll just acknowledge that Councillor Green is not with us today. She's unable to join us at this meeting, but will be joining us again in April. And we have Councillor Braithwaite, who's joining us remotely this evening. Up first, we have adoption of minutes. I'll take them all moved together, but I understand there's at least one amendment to come. So if I can just have a mover and a seconder for the four. Moved and seconded, thank you. Changes, corrections, amendments. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. So making reference to the minutes of the regular council meeting under 3.2 of March 10th. So this is the open meeting. With respect to matter 2025-127, it actually begins on page 6 of those minutes and extends onto page 7 of those minutes. The language on the motion here says on just at the very top of page 7 under matter 2025-127, it reads, and that a project backgrounder for an analysis of concerns raised by residents regarding parking and traffic concerns in the Carrick-Haultain, Easttown, etc. Upon review of the motion made at the time, the motion did not speak to parking and traffic concerns. The language that was used in the motion was concerns raised by residents regarding congestion and parking stress was the language used, and then later on clarified to congestion and parking rather than parking and traffic concerns. So I'd just like the minutes to reflect that the language used in the motion was specifically congestion and parking stress rather than parking and traffic concerns. Thank you, Your Worship.
Sure, I'll just turn to staff who usually just check through these things. Is that in alignment with what you've seen in the minutes as well? We're good? Not a substantial difference between those two things, but just to capture the wording right, you were good. So I got a thumbs up from staff on that. So the motion is to amend it to reflect that language. Is there a seconder then? Moved and seconded, thank you. So the motion right now, call a motion on the amendment to the minutes to reflect those changes. All those in favor? Any opposed, not opposed? Any other changes, corrections, or amendments that people would like to see in any of the minutes? I do appreciate there was one raised earlier, so I thank you, Councillor Smart, for catching another wording ahead of time and making those changes. So with that, we have a motion as amended for the 4 sets of minutes. And seeing no other hands, all those in favor? Any opposed, not opposed? Thank you. From the, we have a Horizon report, which there's no actions to take on that, so it's really just for the public input, public information. Mayor's remarks are reasonably brief tonight. First of all, I just want to thank all the work done by staff and the contractors that got Windsor Park Playground finally open. Very well appreciated during the March break. I did want to just share a little bit from a Transit Commission meeting recently, just acknowledge, just signaling that there's a significant increase in funds required by the Transit Commission to fund some significant capital projects, both in this year and over the 10-year time frame looking ahead. So just understanding of there's many financial pressures, as we know from our discussions here locally, but also regionally on budgets. But that is certainly a significant one that's looking to happen over the coming decade. I just want to extend my thanks to Councillor Patterson for, as the acting mayor, attending the Afghanistan ceremony that happened last week. I was required to attend a Ramadan ceremony at the legislature, which is the first one they've held there, and it was certainly interesting, but always good to sort of support regional initiatives on those fronts. Also want to just encourage everybody who hasn't had a chance to go and attend the Victoria Sketch Club show. This is an annual show. I think it's the 116th show of professional artists. It's held at the Glen Lyon Norfolk Junior School on Beach Drive. These are all professional artists who are showing but also selling their beautiful visual arts. So you have a chance to take it in. It's well worth taking in. This is a very well-respected group of artists, and past members have included people like Emily Carr, for instance. So it's been around a long time and worth stopping in. There is no cost to get in there to look at that as well. I also want to just acknowledge this is the week of the Stanley Cup events. So last week there was the Heritage Talk put on by Helen Hughes, which is she talked a little about the history of the Cougars and their winning of the Stanley Cup in 1925. This Sunday, March 30th, marks the 100th anniversary of the Stanley Cup being won in Oak Bay. And so there is a tremendous group of volunteers and organizers that are putting together a series of events over the course of particularly Saturday, Sunday. But if you have a chance, there's skates, and indoor and outdoor skating and ball hockey and heritage displays and all kinds of things of interest around that. Including a processional with the Stanley Cup arriving at the Recreation Center around noon on Sunday. So if you have a chance, please come by. It's an all ages event for people of all kinds of interest. And if you see people wandering around with their fancy Victoria Cougars hat or their replica knit jerseys from the era, that's what they're for. You might get otherwise confused as something from 100 years ago. So I do hope that there's lots of people come out for that. I think it's going to be a fantastic weekend. That concludes my comments for this evening. Our next order of business is public participation. So every meeting, both council and committee of the whole, we invite members of the public to talk to us either with questions or comments, either online or in person. This is not for items on the agenda. For items on the agenda, we'll invite people to come speak to the matter as it comes onto the agenda. But this is for matters of general interest or curiosity related to council business. I see a hand, so this is a great opportunity to demonstrate how we do this. Just state your name, your municipality of residence, and you have up to 3 minutes to talk to council. Welcome.
My name is Barb Grant. I live in Oak Bay. I'm just going to push this down for you just a little bit. Okay, thank you. Great, thanks. As a resident of Oak Bay, I am deeply grateful that Council has established Oak Bay's first heritage conservation area. It contains many historically significant homes by some of BC's most prominent late 19th and early 20th century architects, including Francis Rattenbury, Samuel McClure, James and James, and others, all of whom played an important role in shaping Oak Bay's history. These properties stand as living witnesses to the rich heritage and architectural beauty that graced our community at the turn of the century. To the public, these historic homes represent integrity, resilience, character, and longevity. They were built by skilled craftsmen with quality materials, and it's crucial that we, as good stewards, preserve these properties and public views of them so as to inspire future generations. Heritage conservation areas are used by local governments to protect the buildings, other structures, land, or features that contribute to the overall heritage character of a place. The HCA bylaw justifies why Council established the Prospect Heritage Conservation Area, lists 4 objectives and guidelines for achieving these objectives. Protecting these properties from insensitive development that diminishes their historic value is Council's obligation to the community and people to come, while at the same time honoring the hard work, dedication, and vision of those who came before us. Preserving these properties has numerous benefits for our community. 1, cultural heritage. Historical buildings contribute to a sense of identity and pride among residents, while attracting tourists interested in exploring our unique history. Economic impact. Studies have shown that heritage preservation stimulates local economies by creating jobs through restoration projects and attracting businesses. 3, environmental sustainability. Retrofitting existing structures reduces carbon emissions associated with new construction, while promoting sustainable development practices. 4, educational opportunities. These homes provide invaluable educational resources for schools, universities, and researchers studying architecture, urban planning, or local history. Let's protect our shared history, celebrate our unique heritage, safeguard these remarkable homes.
Thank you, Ms. Grant. I was about to interrupt you, but you did it yourself. So thank you very much for your concluding and your words. Yes. Please come forward. Exactly the same process. Just need your name and municipality of residence. And,
Okay.
welcome.
Mayor Murdoch, members of council, thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. My name is Terry Wright, and I've lived in Oak Bay for the last 34 years. My comments relate to the proposed development at 2298 Lansdowne Road and the recent March 19th, 2025 Advisory Planning Commission meeting, which I attended. One of the APC members made a very profound remark. They questioned the timing for reviewing a proposal that contains a large increase in density through a one-off, significant amendment to the official community plan before staff and council are able to finalize a new official community plan. These one-off applications, if approved, could set precedents which could constrain the new OCP that Oak Bay is working on. I urge council to defer work on one-off applications for material changes of this nature to the OCP so that staff resources can focus on developing the new OCP. This would allow for a more comprehensive evaluation of the Lansdowne development within the context of the updated official community plan. My second comment relates to the process by which the Advisory Planning Commission evaluates proposed developments with a significant change to the OCP. And it was my first Advisory Planning Commission, so I learned a few things. But at the well-attended meeting of the APC on March 19th, the public was given no opportunity to comment on the proposed development, no opportunity to comment on inaccuracies and omissions in the developer's submission, and no opportunity to comment on concerns with the planning department's report. I believe that information and context was missing in what was presented to the Commission, and which, if presented, may have provided crucial information to inform the view of the Commission. If it's within Council's power, and I'm not sure that it is, but if it is, I urge Council to include in future presentations of this nature a mechanism for the community's concerns and points to be heard. You can imagine the frustration of many residents who attended and felt they had no input into an important determination by the Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wright. Somebody else had their hand up, please come forward. While you're coming forward, I'll just make a broad, just to let you know and other members of the public know, it is true, our procedures are quite intentional that we don't take public input at the advisory body stages. Those bodies are there really to use their background and knowledge, and the Advisory Planning Commission is intended to include people with traffic backgrounds, environmental backgrounds, sort of a broad spectrum, and bring those lenses to an application to flag or and review those with those lenses, but not to reflect necessarily the broader public consideration. They form part of one instance that comes before council, and council does provide, if council ultimately takes those inputs, determines if it has enough merit to go out to a public input, and if it doesn't, they can send it back or make other determinations. And really only at that stage, if council sort of said, okay, we've heard from the input bodies, we've heard from staff, and we feel it has merit to go for public input, it comes there. There is a process that we do require for these kinds of applications, which is a public meeting where we ask the applicants to hold a public meeting and collect that feedback from the public ahead of time, because we know full well that those same feedback will come to us in the future, and the expectation is that they will address those in the course of their application. They can't always, but they should be prepared. So just so you understand, that is intentional. And at this point, we don't have plans to change that process, but never say never. We always try and take lessons learned and make sure we do that well. But that's the intention, is that council it provides the opportunity to provide that input at that time. Sorry, and please welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. My name is Jill Nadeau, and I live at 3270 Woodburn Avenue with my husband and our 3 school-aged daughters. And I'm here to also express my concerns about the proposed 13-unit townhouse development at 2298 Lansdowne Road. I'll keep my remarks brief, and I'll focus on 2 areas. First, the misinformation that's been presented by the developer, Jennifer Travelby, for marking development, and second, the failure of this development to comply with the official community plan. This development is a significant departure from the OCP in almost all areas. Pivotal information regarding traffic, parking, the lot and building itself, the tree protection that has been presented by the developer has been misleading. It's been inaccurate and in some cases false in the documentation that was submitted by the developer and also that was presented to the community at the open house. I have outlined some of these inaccuracies in a separate letter to council. The advisory report does not vet any of the representations that have been put forward by the developer, nor does it verify the accuracy or ensure the validity of the information that was put forward in commissioned supporting reports. The advisory report doesn't state the areas where the proposal significantly deviates from the OCP. Despite the requirements of the OCP, no meaningful consultation with the community has actually occurred. Community consultation isn't a box that can simply be checked by holding one-sided information sessions that contain misleading information. The developer has not consulted with the community. They have not incorporated any changes into their plan based on the overwhelmingly negative feedback of residents. I know that the developer, Jennifer Travelby, submitted a letter of support in her proposal, positioning herself as a long-standing and deeply caring member of this community. However, Ms. Travelby has not engaged with the community during this process and has not attended any meetings or community consultation. Mr. Mayor, you and all the councillors have a duty to ensure that the OCP is followed. This is set out in Section 478 of the Local Government Act. Your responsibility as an elected official is to ensure that development proposals align with the official community plan and that they include public input. This proposal does not align with the OCP and should not continue to be processed in its current form. I respectfully request that as you consider this proposal, you scrutinize the information presented by the developer and her team so that council can make an informed decision based on the accurate information and not the disingenuous representations of a developer who is attempting to capitalize on the province's current mandated housing targets. Thank you for your time and consideration. I appreciate your commitment to responsible and transparent development in Oak Bay.
Thank you very much for your comments. Yeah, please come forward. And there was something I was going to say to that. I just want to flag for the record, the speaker spoke to this. It is correct that that application, as I understand it, does not comply with the current OCP. That being said, we are obligated to take applications coming in. So if they don't comply with the OCP, then it requires a separate and included OCP amendment process, which is a larger process than just, they say, a rezoning, which is compliant with an OCP. So we can't say no. That is, we are actually obligated to have an open mind at all stages of any application, and we are obligated to allow those to come forward as part of that. But there is obviously input that goes into that. So just for the record, that is part of our requirement under the Local Government Act as well, is to follow those processes. But please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is, and good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Michael Miller. I live at 2311 Lansdowne Road. Born and raised in Oak Bay, moved away for a few years Came back in 94, went to Willows Elementary, Oak Bay Junior High, Oak Bay Senior High. So long-standing resident of Oak Bay, and proud to be, and proud to say that. You may actually recognize our home. It's the one in Lansdowne that's constantly decorated for pretty much every occasion of the year. So we're in relatively close proximity to the subject development, and I am here to speak to that. The application that's before you. For the record, neither I or my wife, Monica, are anti-development. We understand that development is a fluid process, and it's part of the evolution of a growing community. I've done a lot of business with developers throughout my career, 38-year career as a commercial real estate broker. So I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of developers, some of the biggest developers in Canada. The things that they all have in common is that they're very respectful and into the communities in which they go. I am, and my wife, we're all for respectful, sympathetic, in-scale developments. The proposed development at 2298 Lansdowne is none of those. It is, in terms of scale, to put it in perspective, last year council approved a rezoning application at 2198 Lansdowne, right at the corner of Lansdowne and Henderson. That's a 14,500 square foot lot. 3 units were approved, 2 townhouses and a single family dwelling. The subject property is just over 20,000 square feet, about 1.4 times the size of 2198 Lansdowne. If you use that same ratio to the 3 units, 2298 Lansdowne should have 4.25, rounded up to 5 units, not 13 units. It is completely out of scale for the neighborhood. The setbacks that they're asking for, the variances are excessive. The height is excessive. I would respectfully ask that all of you actually just go to the site. There's a path that goes from Lansdowne to Woodburn. There's a utility pole there. It's about 40 feet high. That's the height at the peak of the roofs that the developer is proposing. It is monstrous relative to the community. So I would strongly urge and respectfully request that council, mayor and council, just visit the site and have a look for yourself. And when this application does come before council, you send it back to the applicant for a complete redesign, something that's in scale and keeping with the character and quality of that neighborhood. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. They're certainly not yet in front of council, but I would certainly welcome public input, both in writing as well, if people wish to provide that as it comes before council. Go ahead. And just for the record, for people understanding the process, when it comes before council, that meeting is not one for public input. If we think it has merit, then it goes back for a public hearing, and that's where we'd actually seek more formal input from the public. But letters are always welcome, as is this process. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Ryan Wallace. I live at 2465 Florence Street. I want to voice my disappointment that the cycling infrastructure project on Haultain and Henderson has been delayed once again. As the parent of 2 small children, my wife and I were excited to learn about this proposed bike infrastructure, and we remain hopeful that our kids will be able to use this new bike route to get safely to Willows School. Without these improvements, I feel that this route is not safe enough for them to use. Delays like these are the reason for the massive gap in safe cycling infrastructure between Oak Bay and our neighboring municipalities. I would urge council to reflect on the 2022 to 2026 council priorities. I feel this project would help the council and our community make strides towards your stated livability, transportation, and climate change and environment priorities. Please put this item back on the agenda as soon as possible and move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. I do anticipate that coming back to us in April. Any other members of the public who wish to speak to council? Either if you're online, you can use the Zoom app to raise your hand within the reactions tab. Or if you're in the meeting here, you can just lift up your hand or stand up. That works too. Welcome. Same process, just name and municipality residence.
Hi, my name is Denis Perry. I'm an Oak Bay resident. I'm here to speak against the proposed budget that you had recently where you were going to.
Yeah, you're on now. You don't have to keep move
Oh.
your finger away. Oh, no, touch it one more time. There we go.
Okay, sorry.
We do have that on the agenda, but, you know, in the interest of time, I'll let you just go now and.
That's
just get
okay.
to it. Yeah.
I'll come back to it later then.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who wishes to address council on items that aren't on the agenda tonight? Not seeing any other hands raised. Okay, I'm going to call to conclusion the public comment and question period and move on to items on the agenda. Item 7.1, Committee of the Whole recommendations for the meeting held March 13th. These are the recommendations, thank you. Basically, these are this is a bit procedurally awkward. Usually we have items from Committee of the Whole come to this table. We then essentially adopt them and they inform the information that comes to council. Good evening. But because this item is actually on the agenda tonight, these are just informational backgrounders essentially to the item on the for the bylaws, where we will also have public input. So I'm going to ask that we point public input to that that piece. These are all recommendations to ourselves. Do we need a motion for these? It's just motion to receive the Committee of the Whole recommendations, adopt them. Okay, so the motion is to adopt the Committee of the Whole recommendations from the meeting last week. Can I move in a seconder? Moved and seconded, thank you. Any discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor and any opposed? Not opposed. Then we go to, yep. Moving to number 8.1.
I'm sorry, Mayor, sorry.
Yes.
That was for item 7.1, was it?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so there's a portion of that in regards to the UWSS that I'm not in agreement with and had voted against during the budget. So I'm wondering if that would need to be separated so that I could mark my my voice against it.
I think we moved the whole matter forward as a body last week that you made the points within that meeting. So if I think this is now essentially at the point where we're doing the, well, I'll turn to staff on this one. I guess procedurally, what is the best way of marking that? I mean, I would take it as a recommendation as a whole as from council.
Okay, as long as my disapproval was recognized before, that's fine.
It was in the certainly in the minutes of that.
Thank you.
meeting. Okay, thank you. So yeah, go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm, just because we are passing or just passed a motion related to the budget, and we had a speaker who sounded like they were going to speak to the budget.
Yeah,
I just
so-
wanted to make sure that.
Yeah, so when I get to item number 10.2, the budget, that's where we'll do the debate and have public
Okay.
input on it.
Okay, thank you.
Did I call the question on this? I don't think I did, not yet. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I haven't lost track of my, did we call a question on the adoption? Yes. I'm asking the question of staff. Did I call the question on this? Okay. Moving then to 8.1, we go council amendments to the sustainable procurement policy. Ms. LaChance.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. This report has been prepared at Council's direction and as a result of the U.S. taking action to implement tariffs on March 4th. Excuse me. The report provides a summary of the tariff activity up to and including March 10th, the date of drafting this report, and as of today still constitutes the majority of tariff activity, with one exception. On March 13th, Government of Canada announced 25% tariffs on another list of imported U.S. goods. These will remain in place until the U.S. eliminates its tariffs against Canadian steel and aluminum products. The staff report covers staff's early evaluation of procurement alternatives as directed by Council, with 3 options presented for Council consideration. BC municipalities operate under provincial and federal laws, domestic and international trade agreements. The district has a procurement policy in place designed not only to comply with laws and agreements, but also to encourage competition, obtain the best value for goods, services, equipment, construction-related projects, ensure fairness, integrity, accountability, and transparency throughout the procurement process. While not required directly by trade agreements, these practices are considered best practice, and they are designed to achieve a competitive environment. Limiting U.S. suppliers will have a degree of impact. Staff will continue to monitor trade impacts on operations and risks to plans, reporting back to council as impacts are known. Monitoring activities focused on federal and government actions, as well as actions of other local government comparators. So to put more simply, staff will be tying directly to federal announcements as well as provincial announcements, and then also maintaining a active and frequent connection with our procurement practitioners and other local governments. Staff are happy to take questions and/or direction from council at this time.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? This is subject to public input, so we'll take questions first, and then I'll go to public, and then I'll come back here for direction. Any questions? Councillor Patterson, and then Appleton.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to staff, hopefully if they can answer this. But I guess my concern about, I certainly understand the spirit that this is intended and appreciate that, but the difficulty I see is making a change to our sustainable procurement policy that was as dramatic as this. Is it there, the timely tracking impact on municipal services and finances, resources, do we really have the capacity to ascertain right down the chain line that the compliance could actually be met? It just seems that if you have to look completely down the chain line of the suppliers we would purchase from and where they would purchase from and what they were using, it seems like there would be an awful lot of capacity required to ascertain that we were meeting the objectives of what is proposed. I'm wondering if...
Sure, Ms. LaChance,
Yeah.
I was under the impression it was one step down, but how far down the path are we looking at with this?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair, that's a great question. Depending on how the policy statement by council's been formed, the impact of the work staff would have to do would vary. Absolutely, if the wording was focused in on removing all supply coming out of the U.S., then we would have a supply chain issue where our staff would have to figure out the source of those goods. That would be complicated by not only the integrated supply chain and manufacturing that exists between the U.S. and Canada today, but also there are goods imported from other overseas destinations into the U.S., manufactured into a further on product that we would then buy. I think in terms of the current motion and current direction from council, staff's interpretation that local vendors and contractors may rely on U.S. goods and services to conduct their business. And in those cases, the vendors and contractors are considered local for purposes of providing services to the district of Oak Bay. Through the analysis that staff performed, we saw that would be limited impact on staff to try to ascertain exactly where the products come from. We're really focused in on are we sourcing those products through a local supplier and not having adverse effects on those companies.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for that information. And just a follow-up question. There is, of course, the proposal to, and certainly the Canadian federal government is trying to move rapidly through removal of the provincial trade barriers. And I was wondering if there was a sense of further amendments to this policy that might be triggered by those changes. Would that be...
Ms. LaChance?
Yeah.
Through you, Chair, at this point, I'm not aware of any impacts that I could speak to council about tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, and having made the motion in the first place and getting council's support for it, I just really want to thank and commend staff for the content and the analysis that's in this report. Makes council's decision making much easier, and I really appreciate this is somewhat uncharted territory, and I think all of us would wish that we were not in it, but here we are. So I really want to say thank you for that. With respect to the options presented in the report, option 2, talking about mitigating risk of challenge by staying below trade agreement thresholds as outlined in the report. These have financial value, or these have values associated with them. If, with the assumption that we're proceeding forward with exactly as was just described by Ms. LaChance, we're not going to go down into our suppliers' supply chains to analyze where they're getting their goods and services for. As far as direct contracts and the direct goods and services that we procure as the district, I'm going to assume that a significant proportion of what we would be acquiring would fit below these trade agreement thresholds in any case, for the types of typical goods and services that would fall within the purchasing covered by this amendment.
Ms. LaChance?
Yes, through you, Chair, I would agree with that statement.
Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Worship, and appreciate that. And so what I'm reading in the report is just that general practice. This is, again, an evolving field, and our colleagues in adjacent local governments are also evolving into this space. So what I'm reading by this is that, not as I understand it in discussing with colleagues, is that generally the option 2, staying with the trade agreement thresholds is the general approach to things. Is there... Are staff aware of, as was alluded to, there's sort of an ongoing discussion between procurement professionals and folks doing similar roles across different municipalities. I understand that there may be some degree of legal analysis going on this. Is there a way for the district to stay connected with our local colleagues as far as the evolving legal environment around, in fact, and this is beyond the scope of our typical application, but are we in a position to be able to say that it's in fact becoming unnecessary to adhere to these trade agreements if they're being discarded by the United States or others?
Ms. LaChance?
Yes, thank you. I think I would start out to answer the question through you, Chair. If we were looking to take specific direction, if trade agreements have been violated to such a condition that they no longer apply, we would be looking for the federal government to give us that direction. They are responsible for international trade, as well as some provincial responsibility that informs that federal viewpoint. So in terms of staying connected with our procurement professionals, they're meeting more frequently than usual, and I think they meet regularly at a monthly basis. There is legal analysis happening, but it has been widely shared amongst the group, so nothing extensive. The general theme and statement is that we need to better understand how this will actually transpire. We have experienced 2 to 3 weeks of frequently changing facts coming from both federal and provincial government. So it is quickly evolving. I've learned so much about trade. I am not a specialist on trade. I'll be the first to say that. But definitely have a responsibility as my role as CFO to make sure that we can assess risk to plans and allow my colleagues to assess impact operations and supply chain, any disruptions to services. So, just to circle back, when we're looking at those trade agreements and how we would operate within them, we look for federal government direction on that. And then in terms of the state, the analysis is in today. We do have confirmation that the U.S. trade agreement is still considered in place. And that is not actually directly attributable to a municipal body. And so we are able to limit competition and suppliers outside of those limits. But they are obviously contemplated in every trade agreement to support the best practices in procurement. So I'll stop there and happy to answer if I've missed anything there. Happy to follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chance. Anything else, Councillor Appleton? No, that's fine. Okay, thank you. I don't see other hands, so I'll turn to members of the public, either online or in person. Anybody wish to speak to this matter, 8.1? This is the sustainable procurement policy suggested changes based on the U.S. trade war. I'll just call it that. Not seeing anybody in the audience sticking up their hand in a hurry on this one or online. So back to this table, we have three options as noted in front of us. I think option one was essentially what was provided in the last go-around. Option two is just perhaps changing the thresholds if we wish, or option three, of course, is a slightly different direction. I'll turn to this body if you want to give some additional, I appreciate a motion on the floor so we can speak to it. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll start by just receiving the staff report.
We can do that. Seconder? Sorry, I need a hand from somebody. There we go. Thanks. All those in favor? Any opposed, unopposed?
And Your Worship, I would like to move that Council direct staff to amend the policy as per option 2 under operational considerations in the staff report, specifically with mitigating risk of challenge and risk to fair competition by focusing support for local suppliers below trade agreement thresholds.
Okay, is there a seconder for that, for option 2? Moved and seconded. Go ahead, wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Your Worship, and again, extending very significant thanks to staff for providing this analysis. I know that the question of trade thresholds has been a significant one for some of our colleague organizations and other municipal governments, and certainly in bringing the original motion forward, it was not necessarily my aim to challenge those trade agreements or create exposure or risk for the district by contemplating such a move. I think it's reasonable to proceed in this fashion at this stage of the game because it allows us to action those things which are directly within our purview. Again, always with the understanding that our impact as far as procurement will be modest in this case, but it sends a signal of what we seek to accomplish. From what I understand, and backed up by what Ms. LaChance has communicated here with respect to the legalities of the trade agreements, we will await with some interest what senior levels of government will tell us with respect to those trade agreements, and also what I would expect ourselves and our colleagues' organizations. This is something for the UBCM level or senior government advocacy as far as how we would respond with respect to those procurement guidelines. So I think these are excellent options and happy to move forward in this way. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion for option 2? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I appreciate the spirit that this is brought by. I don't support it at this time. I think that some of these issues are better left in place right now with the federal and provincial governments, and based on those decisions that come down the pipes, then we consider what we want to do. But I think that taking the somewhat of an adversarial position right off the hop may not be in the best interest, and certainly a lot of the discussion I see from other levels of government is, yes, there's some of it is contentious, but there's also a desire to keep the door open, to have positive conversations, and so in that light, I think that's where I'm more comfortable. And so I kind of liked option 3 and rather than option 2.
Thank you for that. Any other discussion? Okay, I'll just speak briefly on this. I am supportive of option 2. I do appreciate this is more of a symbolic piece. It doesn't really change our policy substantively. And of course, I think most importantly, we've removed significantly the risk either of contravention of trade agreements with this option 2, but also I think the significant impacts on operations that are necessary for things like software licensing and things. So I think this is a reasonable balance. I'm happy to support the motion as it's gone forward at this point. Not seeing any other hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Oh, Councillor Watson, sorry.
Sorry, option 2 is kind of what option 2 would be as written out in the report, but there isn't actually a motion in the report that is option 2. So we probably actually need a worded motion because we're not quite there yet.
Councillor Appleton, do you wish to convert that into language of a motion?
Well, I think I did, Your Worship, say that I was in favor of advancing option 2 as listed under operational considerations in the staff report, rather than option 2 under options. So, and did specifically identify mitigating risk of challenge and risk to fair competition by focusing support for local suppliers below trade agreement thresholds.
And then that would be, that we would approve the amended policy to include specific thresholds in alignment with existing trade agreements. That'd be the language.
Correct, Your Worship. Yeah, as per the language outlined in option 2 under operational considerations in the staff report.
Is that clear enough, Councillor Watson?
As long as that's also clear with staff. We're working on the fly here.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We've got nods around the table. Okay. So this is at the option 2 is listed as the second paragraph of page 5 of 27, if that helps. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? Councillor Patterson opposed. That carries. We move now to item 9.1, a heritage alteration permit, HAP 00034 for 1052 Newport Avenue. I have Mr. Green is not here, so Mr. Bull, our Director of Community Building and Planning. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. A short introduction on this heritage alteration permit. This is for a existing building located at 1052 Newport. It's the old Oak Bay guest house, a bed and breakfast that was operating from all the way from 1922 to 2021, almost 100 years. Currently, it's a boarding facility for the Glenlyon Norfolk School, and the heritage alteration has to do with a maintenance of the building and a repainting of the outside of the building, removal of awnings that had been installed at a later date. The property is heritage designated, and therefore this permit is required to authorize the changes. And there is an attachment from the heritage consultant outlining a color scheme, proposed color scheme for the building, and the removal of the awning. That's the scope, and that's in short the summary of the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As fairly straightforward request from as a heritage alteration permits go. We do have the applicant online, I see, so I'll just give council the opportunity if there's any questions for staff or the applicant. And if not, I'll go to motions. Don't see questions popping up, so perhaps a motion to receive the report first. Moved and seconded, thank you. I don't usually debate those. All those in favor? Any opposed, unopposed? And perhaps someone would like to make a motion. Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to move the staff recommendation that the heritage alteration permit for the property located at 1052 Newport Avenue be approved.
Moved and seconded, thank you. Any other discussion? Councillor Smart.
Yeah, I'll just give a quick update that the Heritage Commission was very much in support of this project. They expressed some surprise that it had to go through an application process and would hope that in the future that things like this could be staff delegated, but very much appreciated the work done for the application and was very much in support of the colors and approach.
Great, thank you very much. Don't see any other discussion, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed, unopposed? Thank you very much to JNS. I see Mr. Goddard online for your work in that building, both maintaining it and it's by all accounts you've been positive addition to the neighborhood in terms of the activities around the building and so forth. So good luck with the project, and we will move forward. Moving on to item 10.1. These are amendment bylaws to advance climate action. Ms. Woods is here. Good. Ms. Woods is our senior planner for climate action, and these are a series of bylaws that came back from direction given at a previous council meeting. Welcome, Ms. Woods.
Thank you. So good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm pleased to be here tonight to provide an overview of proposed bylaw amendments to 3 existing bylaws in support of advancing climate action in the district. Last spring, Council directed staff to draft amendment bylaws to the zoning bylaw and the parking and facilities bylaw, and after a follow-up report to Council in January of this year, Council also directed staff to draft revisions to the anti-noise bylaw. The proposed changes support low-carbon new and retrofitted buildings and are aligned with both the local government low-carbon building policy toolkit and the recommendations from Origin Sustainable Design and Planning, the consultant hired by staff in 2024 to support this work. The proposed bylaw amendments are recommended to support the Energy Step Code and Zero Carbon Step Code implementation in Oak Bay by addressing some outdated bylaw language that may present undue barriers or challenges to compliance. The amendments represent small changes to improve overall development processes and support the district's transition towards a zero carbon future. The following bylaw amendments are being proposed to council tonight for consideration and first 3 readings. Increased flexibility for siting heat pumps in front and side yards with a new specific restriction on noise and a requirement to site heat pumps a minimum of 1.5 meters from a property line. Changes to the definition of gross floor area so that buildings that use a thicker wall assembly as a high-performance building design strategy are not penalized by having less usable or saleable floor area. Allowing limited setback incursions for buildings that use a thicker wall assembly as a high-performance design strategy. Updating building height exceptions, so that buildings that use a thicker roof assembly as a high-performance design strategy or that include rooftop renewable or low-carbon energy systems have fewer barriers. And finally, requiring a level 2 EV-ready parking in residential uses to support the transition to electric vehicles in Oak Bay. As you consider these bylaw amendments, both myself and Andre Boll, Director of Community Building and Planning Services, are available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Woods. We have a series of bylaws here. I'll take questions from members of council on any one of them, if there's any questions. After that, we'll go to the members of the public. If there's any comments or questions, we can take those. And then we'll come back to this table for some direction from council. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Well, thank you. Through you, Mayor, to staff. I just had a question about the heat pumps in side yards. We did receive some public correspondence, and I just wanted to ask, so it looks like the placement in side yards is going to be purely allowed, not necessarily staff delegated or with any other specific requirements other than decibels, and I just wondered if staff could confirm my understanding of that.
Ms. Woods?
Yeah, through the mayor, the only additional provision would be that should heat pumps be sited in front yards, there is a screening requirement, but no screening requirement for side yards.
Great, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Ms. Woods. I guess my follow-up question would be if council did decide they wanted to have some more control over the placement of heat pumps in side yards, either through sound mitigation or through a staff delegated process, would that be possible, and what would that entail?
Mr. Bull.
Through you, Mayor. There's a couple of options. The most straightforward option would be to opt for different setbacks or different noise levels. That would be probably the preferable way to set a clear expectations. To add in a review, it's also possible, of course, but then we would probably need to come back to you with criteria of what kind of review would be required and or expected at that point. So, thank you.
Thank you for that. Just so my memory is triggered from this as well, the part of this recommendation, not included in bylaws, but is to have a best practices guide available for applicants. Is that also being prepared, Ms. Woods?
Yes, so that's correct, and that guide is in development currently, and would be expected to be made publicly available through our website and through printouts.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Smart, please continue.
Oh, thank you. Through you, Mayor, to staff, a follow-up question. When we had discussed the best practices guide earlier, it was brought up, is there a way of bringing some sort of teeth to that guide in having like a checkbox on the building permit application that you've at least read it? And I wondered, there seemed to be some notion at a previous meeting that that might be possible, and I just wanted to follow up to see if that still might be possible, because if a guideline isn't referred to early enough in the process, then it's not likely to impact project design. Thanks.
Mr. Bull?
To you, Mayor. That is a suggestion we could look at. Currently, as part of the any building permit application, you're already signing off, but very in general terms to comply to all the bylaws that the district has. But that's of course very generic. It's more of a standard requirement or expectation, so to say. We don't really at the moment have too many specific other questions. It could be added, but yeah, from a staff perspective, a little bit of hesitation because it would be lifting out a particular topic. There may be many other topics that could be lifted out. Yeah, but in terms of guidelines, I think definitely we can make sure, maybe through a different just a process around the building permit, that the applicant is aware of the guidelines and has gotten that for sure. Or otherwise, but that's a bit up to the reviewers themselves to see if there's clearly a location chosen that is not really following the brochure or best practices, to ask the question to the applicant. Are you sure this is the right location? How did you come to this particular choice, right? So, and that's a bit of a softer approach rather than putting it on forms and whatnot. But that's another way I see this being implemented, just working with the applicant on a more of a common sense basis. Thank you.
Anything else, Councillor Smart? Please continue.
Yeah, thank you. One more question through you, Mayor, to staff. With regards to other municipalities that have a 40 decibel limit at nighttime, it sounds like from a previous comment that I heard that it may be easy to amend our bylaw to include sort of that matching regional approach, where I gather at night, it's one of the most difficult times with particularly defrost cycles in the winter where sounds can disrupt sleeping. And so I just wanted to find out and confirm that that might be a rather easy change if we decided to add the 45 decibels at night requirement.
Thank you. You just misspoke. I want to make sure we're very clear. 50 decibels in the daytime and 45 in the, yes. Thank you. Ms. Woods.
Thank you. Through the mayor, yes, we could make that change, and that would be in alignment with the quietest zones or areas as specified by our neighboring municipalities, the District of Saanich and City of Victoria. They do have other zones where there's a higher noise threshold. We don't differentiate, and we sort of came to the 50 decibel limit across the board because that was the existing provision that was in the bylaw, which was 40 previously, and we didn't separate or distinguish between nighttime noise and daytime noise.
Thank you for that. Anything other questions? Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to staff. Please, I have a technical question about the drafting, and I'm specifically looking at the zoning bylaw amendment with respect to the general regulations and building height. So 4.7.1, parenthesis 3. Oh, no, sorry, I'm on the wrong one. 4.7.14, which makes reference to, uses the term low carbon rooftop mechanical equipment, which would allow a higher building height if that's installed. And it's, I understand that when we're drafting, we're really looking for generic and broad terms that we can use, but we also have to be able to monitor compliance. So I just wondered if the drafter had considered whether we needed a definition of what low carbon means in the bylaw, because there isn't one right now, and these things change over time, the equipment changes over time, and so are we both specific and generic enough to make this an enforceable provision?
Ms. Woods?
Through the mayor, that's correct. There's no definition for what constitutes low carbon rooftop mechanical equipment currently, which is what's being referred to in that specific item. We could add a definition there. It's, maybe up to council's discretion whether or not that would be necessary. It is the only reference, I believe, to the term low carbon in the zoning bylaw. We don't believe that there would be potentially too much confusion around what would constitute low carbon. In this instance, it's almost specifically referring to electric heat pump condensing units that are mounted on the roof. So whether or not that definition is needed is up to council, and it certainly is something that we could include. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Are there any other questions from members of council? Councillor Patterson, and then I'll go to the public if there's any comments or questions.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to staff. So under the bylaw number 4902, proposed amendments, the anti-noise bylaw, it does, of course, set the guidelines under which the heat pumps can emit sound and impacts on neighboring properties. Could you just speak to the enforcement of that? So if, presumably the applicants will provide information on the heat pump, and the equipment always does state what the targeted decibel levels are reading. So at the time of installation, that should be hopefully meeting the requirements and intent of what we are doing here. But if after the fact, a neighboring property did have a problem and brought forward a notice under the anti-noise bylaw, then is it up to the homeowners to resolve the problem, or would the municipality, would it trigger an action by the municipality to intercede on the discussion?
Mr. Bowl.
Now, through you, Mayor, given that most or new models do meet these sound standards, we would rely on that. If people install a new equipment, it should have proper sound rating. It's also something that currently is not reviewed through building permit process, so it's simply what is it called, a technical matter that is added to your house. Further down, or looking into the future, when this might come up as an issue, first order of business, of course, is we hope that residents will talk to the neighbors and try to resolve it that way. But there is a process possible through the bylaw enforcement route, where our staff would take a measurement and confirm what's the case, and if the limit is exceeded, then we would work with the owner of the heat pump in this case to make adjustments, either it's maintenance, replacement, or if needed, relocation of the equipment. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, at this point, I'm going to go to members of the public. Any members of the public wish to speak to us about any of these bylaw amendments being contemplated here tonight? I'm looking online as well, but I do not see any hands raised. Nope. Okay, we're going to come back to this table then. We have a series of things. We'd start off normally with just a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on receipt? As usual, all those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. Just procedurally here, if people do wish to make any suggested changes to the bylaws, what we would do is give first and second reading. We can have debate. If people wish to make an amendment, we can do that. We can have votes on amendments. We would then vote on a third reading as amended if any amendments happened. I think my thinking here is we'll just do them in the order that they're in the report to contemplate the bylaws as they are in here right now, or if there's any amendments. So I'm happy to walk through those. So procedurally, I might just ask that people, again, I need someone to fully read the first and second reading language, and then we'll get to, go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
So, Your Worship, I would move that Council give first and second reading to zoning bylaw number 3531, 1986, amendment bylaw number 4900, 2025.
Okay, that's moved and seconded. We have that for debate. Any discussion? Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Just with this approach being brought in now, which I very much appreciate, I'm not entirely clear on which or multiple ones I might need to amend if I was bringing forward amendment with regards to the 45 decibels at night. I think it might be under the anti-noise one, but it could be under the zoning. Could staff clarify? Thank you.
Absolutely. My understanding of that, it would be under the noise bylaw, but over to you, Ms. Woods.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so we take the amendment for the anti-noise. That is the only place I saw that it was referenced as the specificity of the 50 decibels. Councillor Watson?
So if this is in the right order, I would like to propose an amendment to zoning bylaw 4900, 2025. It's as a text amendment to replace the language concerning low carbon rooftop mechanical equipment with a specific language for heat pumps.
So what I'm going to do is I'll go to Ms. Plouffe, but I understand, I think we would direct staff to include changes and come back, and then we would amend it and then do adoption with the changes written down for us. But Ms. Plouffe, I can take your direction.
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch. Amendments need to come after second reading. Oh, I didn't see that you voted on it.
Oh, sorry. I
Apologies.
jumped in. Yes, yeah. Okay, right, okay, all right.
My apologies, that's my bad on my procedure.
So, my bad too, should have known.
So we have first and second reading, and then I'll call the question on the second reading, first and second reading. Then we'll take any amendments, and then we'll do a third reading. So my apologies, I should know that procedure. So right now we have first and second reading live on the floor. Take any other questions or discussion before I call the question, then we can take any amendments. All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
I would like to move an amendment to zoning bylaw, numbers at the top, 4900, thank you. A text amendment to section 4.7.1 so that the wording for proposed section 4.7.14 refers to heat pumps and not low carbon rooftop mechanical equipment. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that the wording that we're using here in the amendment is clear enough. So this is essentially direction to be, I'm just wondering, just for my, I want to give the maximum amount of room for the staff to do the right wording. And so I'm just want to make sure, is an amendment along the lines of to include a definition of, or to more clearly define what is meant by rooftop, low carbon equipment. Is that sufficient, and then that can be included in the final adoption, or do you like to have the specificity of saying heat pump equipment? Maybe I'll go to Mr. Bowl on that one.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just quickly checking for the text, but text-wise, this is a very easy amendment because it's also a defined term, so that works really well. To define low carbon, that's a bit more, that needs to be defined, so we would probably bring that back at a later date. So in this particular case, either option would work well for us, I think. Thank you.
Okay, so the wording right now is just to be, instead of saying low carbon, just to say heat pump equipment. Is that, and is, okay, so moved. Is there a seconder for that motion? Moved and seconded, okay. I'm just going to turn to staff to make sure that procedurally this is all on board. So the language change here, that's your understanding of what the intent of this bylaw is as well. It doesn't change the intent of what was put forward. Ms. Woods?
Yeah, that's correct, not to my understanding. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, so just a bit more clarity in language. Thank you, Councillor Watson. Any other discussion on the amendment? So I'm going to call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? And any opposed? None opposed. So we now have second, well, we have second read. It's now amended. So if we have third reading, it'll be third reading as amended. Any other suggested changes on the zoning bylaw portion of this series of bylaws? Not seeing any, so I will call the question. I've called the question on the amendment. I need a motion for third reading read aloud as amended.
Your worship, I would move that council give third reading to zoning bylaw number 3531, 1986, amendment bylaw number 4900, 2025 as amended.
Thank you, seconded. Thank you. We don't usually debate third reading, but it has been amended, so I'll give the opportunity here if anybody wishes to discuss. Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. So that'll come back for adoption at a future meeting. I'll go through the same process for the anti-noise bylaw.
Your worship, I would move that council give first and second reading to anti-noise bylaw number 3210, 1977, amendment bylaw number 4902, 2025.
Thank you. Mover, is there a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Appleton, do you wish to speak to it at all? No. Councillor Smart?
Thank you. If this is the appropriate time, I'd like to make an amendment.
Please, this is the appropriate time.
That.
Oh, wait, sorry, I have to call the question on the
Yeah.
second reading. Sorry, slightly different process than usual. So all those in favor of second reading? Not opposed, that carries. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
My amendment would be that staff add a heat pump sound limit of 45 decibels at night.
So the amendment is to amend the wording to include limits of noise to 45 decibels in the evening. I think the exact wording would come back as with the adoption piece. I don't think we can, I don't know if there's specific language that staff might make recommendations and we don't have any lack of clarity here. I think the intent is clear. Mr. Bull?
Thank you, Mayor. I think either in the correspondence or in the comments today, I think there was reference made to our neighboring municipalities, so we would seek to compare and make sure we use the same hours. So that would be the change we would make. Thank you.
Okay, so mover seems to be in agreement with that approach. Is there a seconder then for the, moved and seconded, thank you for the amendment. Any other discussion on that amendment? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. In hearing from some residents, including the correspondence we received today, and also in looking at other municipalities' approach, I acknowledge that there are real sound issues that disturbs people's sleep at night, and if we can add a little bit more aggressiveness to the sound limit at night, I feel like it will support our residents without causing too much difficulty with allowing for the people using heat pumps. So I feel like this strikes a little bit of a better balance and meets a regional approach.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. Any other discussion? Don't see any, so I will call the question on the amendment at this point. All those in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. We now have we now contemplate third reading as amended, but before we go there, I'm just going to see if there's any other amendments that people would like to see to the noise bylaw portion of the series. I do not see any, so I'm going to, if you can read the next motion.
Yeah, Your Worship, I would move that Council give third reading to anti-noise bylaw number 3210, 1977, amendment bylaw number 4902, 2025 as amended.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you. Any other discussion? Not usually on third reading. All those in favor? Any opposed? And none opposed. That carries. Please continue.
Your Worship, I would move that Council give first and second reading to parking facilities bylaw number 3540, 1986, amendment bylaw number 4901, 2025.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? Not seeing any. No amendments. Of course, that would come after second reading. All those in favor of second reading? Any opposed? None opposed. Are there any amendments that people would like to see to this? Seeing none, perhaps I will get to third reading.
Well, Your Worship, I would move that Council give third reading to parking facilities bylaw number 3540, 1986, amendment bylaw number 4901, 2025.
Moved and seconded. I see a hand for seconding. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. All of those will go. Oh, sorry, Councillor Smart.
I do have a motion arising related to this report that I could bring up now, or if you prefer, at the end of the meeting under new business.
What is it?
That staff utilize the heat pump building permit guidelines in reviewing and commenting on building permit applications.
Can you just read that again?
That staff utilize the heat pump building permit guidelines in reviewing and commenting on building permit applications.
Okay. I think I'll take that as a new business piece. I'm happy to do that. I just think in the interests of getting to people in the audience who are here to speak to the financial plan piece, I believe. So I'd like to get to that and come back to that. There's only one more item on the agenda, so thank you. Do not let me forget as we get to the end. So moving on to 10.2, we have the 2025 to 2029 financial plan bylaws put forward by Ms. LaChance. We do have people from the audience who wish to speak to it. I'll let you introduce. I think we've had a pretty thorough discussion at the council table. I'll probably go to the public and then back to this table for further discussion. So go ahead, Ms. LaChance.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'll be brief in my comments. I do want to make just a few comments to introduce the item, and then, as you say, we can move into public feedback on that, public input. I'm pleased to be here to present the 2025 to 2029 Financial Plan Bylaw number 4899. The drafted bylaw is before council this evening for 3 readings and is set to come back on April 14th for 4th reading and approval. It should be noted that the report referenced April 7th in my error, so I apologize. I was inadvertently adding an additional council meeting in April. So I apologize for that, and apologize to the public who may have been misled there. It should be wherever referenced in the report, April 7th, it should be April 14th. And the bylaw is not impacted by that error on my part. The bylaw reflects council approval of the Committee of the Whole recommendations, and the bylaw provides a legislated 5-year plan for revenue, operating, and capital expenditures, and as well as fund transfers. The community charter requires the financial plan bylaw be adopted before the tax rate bylaw, which all must be received and approved by council before May 15th. Staff are recommending that council give first 3 readings to the bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. LaChance. It's always interesting to see such a complicated discussion distilled down to essentially a sheet of numbers for 5 years. I will go to the members of the public first to come forward and make any comments or ask questions. So I asked you to wait, so please come forward. So same process as before, just your name and municipality of residence, and then you have the floor. Just push it one. There we go, perfect. And you can sit back for a minute, but you don't have to be too close.
Mayor, councils. My name is Denis Perry. I'm a resident of Oak Bay. I didn't have time to prepare this in advance of the meeting, but outside of just in the last couple hours, I could, if it's allowed also, I could give you a copy of the printed statement.
You can leave a copy of it with us, absolutely.
Okay. I am part of the St. Anne Community Group that we formed earlier in 2024. We remain concerned about the proposed AAA cycling lanes, which would eliminate all parking along the St. Anne and Monterey corridor. This is concerning for a number of reasons, including that this is a primary route for transit and emergency vehicles. Many of the homes do not have driveways, laneways, or have other parking options, limiting access to our homes for services and home repairs, thereby diminishing our quality of life and our ability to maintain our properties. Further, this proposed change is in violation of the OCP community plan and seriously affects everyone living on our street and surrounding streets, since adequate parking is already in short supply. Despite over 71% of residents responding to the 2024 community survey, ranking bike lanes and associated infrastructure as the lowest priority for the capital projects, over $8 million is being allocated to these current financial budgets being voted on tonight. Why bother asking the community input if it's not taking into consideration? The argument that grants can be used to subsidize the $8 million expenditure is untrue in my view, due to the McNeil grant not being yet spent due to the underground infrastructure first needing to be repaired and replaced. The district cannot apply or depend on further grants funds, as far as I can see. The current tax increases facing residents is I believe 11.1%. Most of the district underground infrastructure is rated as poor, failing, or failed, and the community survey rates cycling lanes as the lowest priority for capital spending. Therefore, the choice to surge forward with projects that only support a small percentage of residents while removing the rights of so many is clearly ideologically driven rather than an inclusive vision for the future of our community. The current budget is allocating huge increases in debt, and at this time of financial uncertainty, where the construction costs will only rise. This choice is irresponsible when there are others, less costly viable options such as reduced speed, signage, shared car and bike markings, and like we've had for many years. Could you answer the reason why council is not following the community survey responses?
Do my best. Just to understand, so the council's direction has been to support active transportation infrastructure. We've identified a couple of sort of low-hanging fruit, low barrier routes, the east, west, north, south on the Haultain-Estevan routes that came before council, and we have some decisions to make about what that's going to look like coming up shortly. The 9 sort of more identified proper cycling routes, which include St. Anne and 8 other roads. The exact implementation of those is yet to be determined, so that both the design of those is yet to be determined, and the consultation plan is yet to be determined. That's coming up before council, I believe, in the next month. As to how we're going to go about doing that. We're going to do it by sort of case by case, or look at the broader piece together. And those decisions then ultimately will lead to council approving a project design going forward. The budget ultimately will be determined by that process, not by what is sort of essentially set aside as an earmark in the budget to allow for that spending to happen should council want to do it. So I think importantly here, while the community survey piece of it is an important piece of that, I think as we go through and allocate those pieces, the more critical part of this is as we go through the community consultation and understand what are the pros and cons and limitations and costs of the various options, that'll lead to ultimately to the design chosen and then the money spent on them. So I think that's probably the important pieces. We haven't got that far down this path other than to agree that cycling safety is important for us as a community, and that we do want to make sure that we are investing to make sure that we are making cycling as safe as possible, recognizing that's a shades of gray, and ultimately that decision will come back to council with community input. So the next stage really is community input into how we're going to consult and whether we're going to do it piecemeal or together, and then that'll lead to more detailed design discussions.
Couple more questions. One is, will the current affected residents be notified properly this time? Just like when we had recently the repaving of the road in December, and which was done in 2 parts, December and just a few weeks ago. Right. We received proper notice on that. So I don't think that it is unreasonable to ask the municipality to request input from all the affected residences properly.
Sure. I think I have to, so we do typically make an effort to make sure that people who are directly impacted are notified. And then we also try and make sure that we give as broad an input as possible. And those two things go hand in hand. One, we do want to have local knowledge. There's often a lot of sort of understanding of what happens. But there's also a broader interest in terms of people who might go through that area but might not live there. So we try and seek both. I can't tell you for sure, because ultimately, we are going to come back to this table and make a determination about what that public consultation will look like and how it's going to guide our next steps. But yes, we, as a general rule, where there's direct impact, we do try and give notifications so that people are directly aware.
My apologies for this question, because I believe you wanted to stay on track of the financial requirement,
Okay.
but
We don't have a huge crowd here, so
to
we'll
talk
take a
about
little
the
moment.
financial aspect, just to get back on top, consideration should be made for lower costs, especially if, I believe the province has it that if the speed limit is down to 30 kilometers, the requirement for protected bike lanes is not required. And we've had the shared lane, so I think it would be a worthy consideration for the municipality. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will say that is going to be part of the discussion that we have. We can leave it just with Ms. Williams on your left. Yeah, thank you for coming out tonight and sharing that. Are there other members of the public who wish to come speak to us? Yeah, please come forward. Same process as before, just name and municipality of residence, hit the button in the middle, and you're off to the races. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Murdoch, council members, and fellow Oak Bay residents. My name is Anton Pisarik, and I've lived on St. Anne Street for 5 years. I would like to just start by acknowledging my neighbors. My neighbors are some of the most wonderful people I've ever met, and each one of them has enriched my life in this community. And tonight, I would urge you to reject this $8 million so-called low-hanging fruit bike lane project, not just for the practical reason, but because it threatens the very essence of what makes our community special. $8 million for bike lanes that will disrupt neighborhoods, eliminate parking, and worsen congestion. There's spots on Bowker Street where two cars already can't pass simultaneously. That's $8 million spent on not spent on community events, updating aging pipe infrastructure, or preserving our green spaces. This project feels less like serving residents and more like chasing a trend at our own expense. The charm of Oak Bay lies in its imperfections. The cracked sidewalks, the old-growth trees that buckle in the pavement, which they removed recently from my street. There's a Japanese proverb, perfection is in imperfection. And Oak Bay's quirks aren't flaws. They're what keep it real, what keep it home. If I wanted a cookie-cutter utopia, I'd live in Langford. But I chose Oak Bay, and so did most of us. I urge you to side with the residents who love Oak Bay, not as some planner's clipboard says it should be. This isn't just about bike lanes, it's about whether Oak Bay remains a community or becomes a construction zone for someone else's vision. Once these lanes go in, the president has said, more. And then the Oak Bay we adore, the one with character and stories, will disappear. And the only thing remaining will be a Google Maps picture. So I urge you to please protect Oak Bay and vote this out. Let's fix what's actually broken and not what a few outsiders think we need to look perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. It's probably worth just asking Ms. LaChance just to kind of clarify a little bit about where we are in this financial planning process, the money, the $8 million in our financial planning process to support active transportation. How, I just want to make sure my comments are reasonably accurate here, just because I think this is a financial plan, but it's not an authorization of projects, and maybe it'd be helpful to get an understanding of where we are in that process. Ms. LaChance?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I had agreed with your statements, as you had said them earlier, that the financial plan will set up the expenditure limits on both the operating and capital plans, inclusive of both tracks of active transportation. And the eventual execution or start of those projects does come back to council for consideration, and then does undergo a public engagement process to inform and ensure that the community is ready for those projects. Of course, I am now venturing out of my lane. My colleague, as I understand it, Mr. Rennick is just off today, so he's not here. But just wanted to make sure that I stay in my lane. As you said, the financial plan provides the expenditure authority. The actual execution of that capital plan has to undergo the project phases and has a number of gates to actually get that project going.
Thank you. And just so we're making the right decisions here at this table tonight in terms of the financial plan, my understanding is that that financial plan, we've been sort of setting aside some money, and this includes a slight increase in terms of money we're putting into active transportation, as well as other infrastructure reserves. But I guess I'm trying to get my head around, there's really nothing in this financial plan that we would add to or take away from that would, outside of that potential increase this year of the $100,000. That would change, or $200,000, that would change the tax implications per se. It's really, that is a future, pull from reserves approach. So at the end of the day, we will have the opportunity to allocate money from reserves. We are putting money in at this point, not taking it out. Maybe I probably made a hash of that, so why don't I leave that for you to describe?
If I do take your meaning, to respond to your question, Chair. So I'm just trying to figure out how to get into there and get into the response. But so no, I think you're quite right in asking about in terms of the tax rate increase. There is a phased implementation of tax rate increases that are being transferred to reserve related to active transportation. The impact of that is in the current tax rate, but is being phased in. There are other reserves in place that are being considered to fund that program. And then, of course, over time, as that reserve is built up and will start funding future projects, Council will have the opportunity to reallocate to different projects or pre-prioritize the order of those projects. So I hope I got your meaning. I apologize if I missed it.
I think it's just helpful to try and to put some context in here, because I hear the concerns being raised, which is that that's a lot of money. There's a concern about the tax increase, which we share at this table, and so the question is, what do we do about those two things in this table tonight in terms of the financial plan bylaw? So I think that's helpful. I have one person online, and if there's anybody else in the room, I'll go back here. There's someone who's just identified by their phone name. Oh, there we go. Listed as Shelby now. If you want to unmute yourself, you can state your name and municipality of residence. You're welcome to address council.
Hi, hello. Can you all hear me?
We can. Please go ahead.
Okay. I am Shelby Kane. I live in the municipality of Oak Bay. I just got here, so I did have a question, but before that, I wanted to say that I very much disagree with the previous gentleman. I do not find anything charming about cracked sidewalks. And when I think about the Oak Bay that I want to live in, it's one that is accessible to people with mobility devices and like just general quality infrastructure. I don't think Oak Bay's charm is in its neglected infrastructure. But anyway, my question was, I'm looking at the report from the Committee of the Whole, comparing the percent change from 2024 to 2025. And there is the percent change for fiscal and contingencies is up 60%. but building and planning is down 19%. And I was wondering if that could be explained.
I'm going to go over to staff, but I believe those are just missing a decimal place there, if that's the case. Ms. LaChance?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Happy to answer that question. For the 2025 financial plan process, with some contracts and agreements, having escalation, having staff have expectations that there's escalation within those contracts. We provided an estimate in the contingency line for 2025. It wouldn't have been the present in 2024 to the same degree. We do see that amount having increased significantly as referenced by the member of the public. And so that is an estimate that Council considered as a direct cost driver to the taxation increase and was discussed at the Committee of the Whole meetings. And then with respect to the building and planning, the numbers weren't jumping out at me, but I do think I can comment at this point without cracking the book open that the building and planning division does have revenues that offset expenditures coming from fees and charges on applications, and we would see and have planned an increase in 2025 based on the activity that we are expecting for 2025. That would offset the expenditure amounts and translate to a net decrease. I would like a moment just to double check my facts on that, but that's what I would just respond at this point.
Thank you very much. Anything else, Ms. Kane?
I suppose I was wondering what makes parks and recreation so expensive, but I suppose it's like all of the programs at recreation centers.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a very high portion of our budget, and there's a portion of that, a significant portion, about 62% this year is getting through recoveries. So those are user fees, et cetera, but the balance is covered through subsidies paid by the general taxpayer. Do you need more detail than that?
Probably not.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us this evening.
Yes, thank you. Oh, also, I would just like to say the police budget should be lowered. But that's, that's just my opinion.
Thank you. Opinions are welcome. Nobody else I see online, anybody else in the room would like to address council either with questions or comments at this time? Okay. All right, we're going to come back to this table then and seek some direction from council. We have a financial plan bylaw in front of us here for first, second, and third reading. Generally speaking, we would we'll do this in the order of receipt first.
I'll move receipt of the staff report, Your Worship.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you. All those in favor of receipt? Any opposed? None opposed? That's always the easy one. We always appreciate that.
Your Worship, I would move that council give first and second reading to the 2025 to 2029 financial plan bylaw number 4899, 2025.
Moved. Is there a seconder? Thank you. Again, same process as before. If there were any amendments, then we would take them at this time, and then we would move third reading as amended. But I don't anticipate any, but I'm just laying out there for the purposes of process. This is the chance for discussion and debate. At this time, anybody wish to speak? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes,
Appleton.
thank you. Thank you, Mayor. It's been interesting to listen to some of the ongoing discussion. But I guess I have struggled in reviewing this plan. Some of my concerns I have, one of the biggest concerns is the fact that we are going to draft a debt management policy after making recommendations on the amount of the debt that will be incurred. I think that's a bit backwards. I think it's better governance actually to draft the debt policy in advance of recommendations. I certainly have recognized and talked about it in the discussions, the risk to certainty threshold that is inherent in this 5-year plan, but the preceding discussions actually identified the plan really is in essence a 1-year plan or 1-year approved plan. I have difficulty with it, certainly in the context of what we are considering for debt and the allocation of the debt that will be undertaken to be assumed in the in context of broader economic uncertainty and pressures that are exerted on our budget now and certainly could become broader in the future. And but on the balancing side, I think I am assured that there are certain stops and checks along the way, and that many of the proposals in the plan will come back to council for further discussion and for public consultation where required. And I'm also confident that we can still have a second discussion on the debt simply because a council resolution is required before we incur any debt. And so by passing this, we don't pass all of the what is contained in the 5-year plan, other than the actual recommendation that we further consider in years 4, 3, 4, and 5. And so with that, and listening to what the members of the community have said, I certainly appreciate their comments and I understand their concerns, but I think that understanding the checks and balances that are in place and what will come back to council, I will support it going forward tonight. Those are my comments on it.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Worship. And I feel now is the juncture in the adoption of the financial plan to sort of just make some general comments with respect to where I believe that the district finds itself. And I think that the comments from members of the public and the comments that are coming up at this juncture really represent to me just very representative of the nature of the discussion that the district will find itself having with respect to its finances in the very near term. And it is very much a discussion between to balance and recognize the immediate needs of the community and the deferred needs of the community and the very finite amount of taxation revenue that the community can currently generate. There is a very finite number in that, implicit in that conversation. And we will be having a very different discussion in the year to come. I appreciate Councillor Patterson's comment. It is a 5-year plan, but it is really a 1-year plan in a lot of ways because we are going to have to revisit a lot of our assumptions in the year to come and then again in the year after that. We find ourselves up against some really challenging propositions to be able to provide for needs of residents that are coming into the community now and to deal with deferred maintenance, to deal with all the deferred costs that the community finds itself in. And we will be having a very real and very practical conversation, in my view, about levels of service and the types of services the community can provide, balanced against diversification of the tax base, and really what this community can afford. We're looking at a significant amount of borrowing to be able to support facilities that we absolutely need and the community absolutely requires. But this is now shifting into a different type of discussion for the community. So I think that we've had a fulsome and a reasonable discussion about what we can do with the existing numbers. But when you look at, built-in 6 to 7% of forced growth is the new norm now. And then we're looking at several percent above and beyond that for debt servicing. We're in a very, very different discussion about tax rates, about tax increases year over year than we were 5 to 10 years ago. And that's just the reality of where we find ourselves. So, and it has changed significantly even in the time that I've been on council. So I guess I'm saying that from my perspective, I hear the comments that the community is making, and I really see some of this friction between people bringing forward, bringing forward concerns about infrastructure and components of the budget that are, in my view, needed, but I understand the friction between that and the very, very significant increased costs that we've got in every category. So I encourage people to continue to plug into the financial planning process and continue to give council their input on these things, because it's not just a matter of what the tax rate looks like around tax time. It's about what services do we prioritize for this community, what do we talk about for levels of service, and how can we diversify our tax base. So there are larger discussions that this community, in my opinion, needs to have. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. The motion on the floor is first and second reading to the financial plan bylaw. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I just wanted to particularly make a mention of the residents of St. Anne that have reached out to us both in the room today and through email to just so that you know that you are seen, you know that letters have been read, and just an appreciation for informing us about the details of your community and the potential repercussions, and just to know that I'm as eager as you to have the detailed conversation of various options. And I just don't want anyone to go away tonight feeling that whatever decision is made on budget tonight has anything to do with further solidifying any decisions on a design for that area. We are eager to have that conversation, and so I just don't want. I just want it to be acknowledged that we hear you. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. Other councillors wishing to speak to the motion? Councillor Watson?
Yes, just to say that, just echoing some of what Councillor Appleton said, I do think that this budget was carefully considered through 2 extensive sessions, and there were lots of opportunities for people to be here. Some people did come to those meetings, dry as they may seem to many, but their participation and their insights are always helpful. This is a difficult budget to be passing at this time, looking into so much uncertainty, but I do think it is carefully considered, and that we are taking the broader best interests of the community into consideration when we make these designations for the different programs and activities and capital expenditures that we are planning to make, notwithstanding that there will inevitably be changes as the future changes. But I think that this is a good budget, and I am really ready to support it. A financial plan, I should say, not a budget. It's a financial plan, and I'm ready to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Braithwaite, did you wish to add anything? Nope. Okay. I'll just speak very briefly. I think much has been said here. I do want to reflect that, every dollar that we ask of taxpayers in the region to pay is money they don't have for other aspects. I do think it's always amazes me the breadth of services that we provide as a municipality. I think we had someone who was asking us to watch how much we were spending and noting that their insurance costs had gone up. I think it was $1,300 or something like that, or more in this year. And I think that's a pretty painful place to be, where we're adding on to that. I also recognize that we also have those kind of insurance increases as an entity. We also have inflationary pressures out the wazoo, and our increase of around $600 a household is, it's all of the police, the fire, the infrastructure investments, the parks and rec, the sidewalks, the roads. It's a lot of different aspects of life that people use every day, and I think we take very seriously the obligation, not just for this term, but for the life cycle of the community, which is hundreds of years, that we're investing in ways that right now, we have increased the amount of money that we're putting in. But if we don't get in front of things like our failing pipes and things now, that cost just balloons in the very near future in ways that we just can't afford. And so we're trying very hard to get in front of those costs and to make sure that we're trying to even it out so that, you know, in perpetuity, we know how much to spend and carry it there on a more inflationary basis. So these are very hard decisions to make. We're trying to balance as well, of course, the changes to the community that are mandated upon us and that we'd like to see in terms of housing and build the infrastructure that will support that simultaneously. I do recognize we're also doing this at a time where we have implemented finally DCCs and ACCs that allow for some of the new development to reflect some of those costs that aren't reflected in taxation, but the new development pays some of those direct costs. It's a balance, and it's a hard one, especially when you start getting into numbers that are double digits in terms of increases, that we have to take that very seriously. I appreciate Councillor Appleton, your points. I mean, these are the hard decisions that we're going to be having over the next few years, and the public input is incredibly helpful as we try and make those trade-offs. We will always have this problem of how much service do we provide and how much is that going to cost, and they're never easy. I'm also very appreciative of this council's support for looking at some potential innovative ways of perhaps getting our recovery rates higher from things like from Parks and Recreation, which might make a noticeable difference, as well as the debt servicing models that I know are coming forward from Ms. LaChance later on this year. That allow us to kind of map that out in a way that makes the burden of these costs fair for generations so that this generation isn't paying for future generations in ways that are unreasonable. So those are all the moving parts of this. I do think the budget is supportable. I think it's painful, but it's supportable because it achieves the long-term financial goals that we have. And it just highlights to us the hard work that we have to do all the time to keep our costs reasonable and to make those hard decisions sometimes on what services we're going to provide. So with that, we have second reading on the floor for financial plan. I don't see other hands popping up at this time. We'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Can I have a reading?
Your Worship, I would move that Council give third reading to the 2025 to 2029 Financial Plan Bylaw number 4899, 2025.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you. I don't usually debate third reading, so I'm just going to call the question. All those in favor? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. With that, this will come back as noted on April 14th for adoption, barring any surprises. You never know what happens, but that's the intention. Thank you, everybody who came here tonight to talk to us, and certainly please stay involved, particularly as the items that, as we get closer to design and budgeting and those things for those specific projects, really do appreciate the input. I go to next to new business, and I believe Councillor Smart, you had an item.
Yeah, thank you. I actually have two. I have two motions potentially arising, one related to an earlier report. So I'll just repeat the first one from
Please.
earlier.
Yeah.
That staff add a heat pumps, oh, no, sorry, reading them. That staff utilize the heat pump building permit guidelines in reviewing and commenting on building permit applications.
Okay. Before I get a second, I'm just going to check with, if it's okay, just for staff clarification of what that would look like. Is that for all building permits essentially? That's the intention. So not like a development permit, but just a building permit process. Is that correct? Okay. Mr. Bowl.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I did have a short chat with Ms. Woods as well in between. Let me see. I think a couple of things to clarify. The best practices guide, so that's what we're calling it, is a set of guidelines. They're pretty generic and not like bylaw provisions, so that's a difference. Let me see. As I noted, it depends a bit on the situation. Just a straight heat pump installation wouldn't be a building permit requirement, but there will be building permit applications for new builds or additions that will show those features, particularly if it gets close to the limits of the bylaw. And at that point, of course, the zoning bylaw regulation gets checked together with the building codes. This is a bit of a softer, if I understand it correctly, a bit of a softer approach, a little bit like a development permit, perhaps. Not quite having the development permit tool, of course. So that makes it a little bit hard to consistently do, I think, from a staff perspective. Because we do have some of the basic outline requirements in the bylaw, so we could further specify the bylaw. Or if there's a desire to check on items, then we would need to think about, is there other mechanisms how this could be done through a checklist? And is it only applying to heat pumps, or are there maybe other topics that need to be checked on the basis of guidelines? So just a couple of comments for your information. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. So I think that's clear. But assuming you wish to still put it forward, can you just read it aloud again so we see if there's a seconder?
Yes, and if I could motivate afterwards, that would be great too.
Of course, yeah, if there's a seconder.
That staff utilize the heat pump best practices guidelines in reviewing and commenting on building permit applications.
Okay. Is there a seconder? For discussion. Yep, seconded. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Well, this is maybe not a magic wand to prevent any conflicts between residents over noise issues. I do feel like it's a proactive way that might prevent quite a few instances from happening in what I appreciated the suggestion from staff in a kind approach manner. From the perspective of a designer, even at the stage of building permit is kind of really one of those like last moments in which you're likely to change a lot of things, like potentially the location of your mechanical room. A heat pump can't necessarily be moved to anywhere. And a lot of people are willing to do the right thing, but may just not know what the right thing is. And I think that a lot of people don't read guidelines unless pressed. And while I realize that as staff are addressing this may be somewhat inconsistently used, even if it's used a bit, it could prevent some instances from having negative repercussions because we are going to see people come to our table in the next few years with sound concerns with neighbors. And so if we can even prevent a few of those by just some reminders of what some guidelines are, I would like to support that.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. Other discussion? Councillor Watson?
Just, may I ask a question of the motion mover? In this motion, are you anticipating that staff are actually actively engaging or maybe just providing the guidelines?
Councillor Smart?
Thank you. I was considering it to be, I guess, a little bit more on the active engagement side of when, a reviewer has the plans and they've got their checklist that they're going through, that whether it's an actual checklist for them or just an awareness of what might be. And I'm thinking particularly of unusual situations, like where you might have like someone's backyard backing onto someone's side yard and all sorts of things, that there might be an obvious situation where that is not the best spot for the heat pump, even though it's allowed. Or have you thought about this? So I guess I just want to give the license and the proactiveness to staff to potentially prevent some sound issues from occurring, recognizing that it's not necessarily going to solve everything.
Councillor Watson, anything else?
Yes, it's a comment actually on the motion. I'm concerned about adding staff workload, which this would be, because it requires discernment about what's going on in a particular application that requires that kind of level of scrutiny at a time when it's a bit of a balancing act. We know we're seeing increasing volumes of requests. We're going to see increasing use of heat pumps. Great. Those are good things. But unless we really have the right operating structure in place, which may be coming, I don't know, adding something that specific to maybe some applications, I think it may detract from a level of efficiency that we're trying to be, I know our staff are trying to be customer focused, and they're going through a process of looking at changes to the way they do business, which is all very good. But I think that us identifying a way for them to change business in this way might not be the most effective thing at this time. I wouldn't be adverse to, maybe suggesting that the guidelines are available or linked in the material or the checklist. But I think an interaction with requiring a specific interaction on that has already required a review at a level of detail of a plan about this, specifically about noise, is actually a bridge too far in terms of a request from council. So I won't support the motion as is.
You talked yourself into voting against it there. Okay. Any other discussion on the motion that's in front of us? Councillor Braithwaite?
Yeah, and listening to Councillor Watson, I kind of agree with her on this. So I will be voting against the motion as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I'm going to ask that you just read it aloud one more time, Councillor Smart, because I'm just trying to get my head around the.
Oh, thank you. That staff utilize the heat pump best practices guidelines in reviewing and commenting on building permit applications.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to just have to turn into a question for staff. Mr. Bowl, the thing that this is hinging on for me is when reviewing and commenting on building permit applications. So I guess, if that's, I'm trying to understand how the staff would interpret this motion if it went forward. Is it just sort of, if that conversation happens, you would use this tool, which you've already agreed to do, in terms of providing it as your guidelines, or is it read as essentially asking staff to have that discussion every time with applications? Because I think it's the first part of that. The first interpretation is essentially in alignment with what we've already doing. But the second one seems to add work and aligns with more Councillor Watson's concerns. And I actually don't understand at this point what the wording of the motion is right now from staff's interpretation.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. That is, that question is exactly the hesitation, because on the face of the motion, I think I would want to implement it consistently, but I'm not entirely sure on its own merits if I can do that. So some clarification or clarity would definitely be helpful, because I think if we want to do that consistently, we need to think about some kind of a checklist approach probably, and think about how we set it up, and doesn't include this topic or maybe more, or if it's more of on a case-by-case basis as it comes up. Perhaps if the site plan shows tightness on height or setbacks, that it's more informal and ad hoc. If that's the expectation, that's good to know as well. Then I think definitely that's something we can work with. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, just the hard part is that the informal and ad hoc doesn't really require a motion. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
I'm hearing from my council colleagues and sensing that this may not gain support at the table. I would like to amend or alter the motion if my seconder might support it.
Well, I might just make a suggestion, just given that this is obviously getting into the realm of how to kind of tease this up. Maybe if you wish, maybe you take it away and just do a notice of motion process. There's no particular timeline attached to this. Because I think what I'm actually hearing is that the broader concern here is that there are policies, noise being one of them with heat pumps, but perhaps other things like overlook of neighbors or those things, maybe some neighbor, good neighbor pieces that might want to be just ask staff to consider a checklist at large that they kind of give people. They might come back with some options for that as opposed to just this, but I'll give it to you. If you wish to make an amendment to your own motion, you're welcome to do so.
I do wish to make an amendment just to wrap this up, because things have a way of never coming. So anyways, I would like to change the motion to read that staff distribute the heat pump building permit guidelines when reviewing building permit applications.
Seconder amendable to that? The seconders, I think, to you.
Yeah, thank you. I guess just to ensure that the guidelines actually reach people at a critical stage when giving comments back when reviewing a building permit application could be a very good strategic time to ensure people receive the guidelines. And so I do see this as one step better than just simply having guidelines that people may or may not refer to ensure that they are distributed.
I'm going to ask the same question to staff as I did before. I'm just trying to staff's understanding of that language of distributing it. And I'm a little just making sure I understand the building permit phase as well, because I would think the building permit phase would be late in that process. Maybe I'm misunderstanding that timing. Mr. Bowl?
Thank you, Mayor. I think I see two ways to implement something like this. I do think we can implement that, because at the part of the at the start of the application process, we work with applicants to inform them what are the different submissions you need to compile and put together for your building permit application. And that would be a good moment to point to this resource, but also to others that we have on the website, particularly the info housing brochure comes to mind. And then subsequently, if there's another opportunity, I think, if the heat pump installation is causing a discussion, that would be another good moment where if staff are instructed and know that there's a resource available, they can bring it to the attention of the applicant and also, you know, make suggestions and work through whatever the discussion point might be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Appleton?
Just thank you, Your Worship, and probably through you to staff, just to confirm that this is something like it's available in a, excuse me being obtuse, but it's available in a fairly easily accessible format. We're talking about a PDF or something like that. Like this is a sort of like fact sheet informational component that staff can just easily point to somebody and say, this is the document, review as required. It doesn't require any, I'm assuming it doesn't require any staff work to prep up or get packaged.
It is under development now, as I understand. It's not quite finished yet. Mr. Bull?
Thank you, Mary. That's correct. It's under preparation. But once completed, it would be one of the resource documents that we have readily available for anybody.
Okay. Again, can I just have you read the motion aloud again, just so we understand what it is we're contemplating, Councillor Smart?
Yes, that staff distribute the heat pump best practices guidelines when reviewing building permit applications.
Okay. Other discussion? Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I mean, it's a little bit difficult. I somewhat understand what Councillor Smart is proposing, or the intent of trying to ensure that we do the best installation for it. And I don't see this as just new applications. I think there'll be a lot of heat pump installations in existing buildings too. But I would really rather wait and be able to see the guidelines fully developed to comment on any instruction that council would have directing staff on how they should be implemented or discharged. So I'd really like to see it first, and then I think once I've seen the content of it, it may be fairly self-explanatory about how it links and how applicants have access to it. And I certainly appreciate Director Bull's comment on it could be very helpful should any dispute situations arise to be able to, you know, backcheck it and say, were best practices implemented, and if not. So it's a guidance document, but I really see it as a guideline and not a bylaw. So I will not support the motion as presented.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion? Councillor Watson?
Sorry, this is maybe getting down into the weeds, but I guess I'm a little concerned with the word distributed, because when we listened to staff here, we heard about including in a part of checklists, making sure people are aware of it. That is different than active distribution. So I think that we got maybe too specific there. I totally understand the intent. We want to make sure people have the right information for their particular project to do the best that they can, given what our expectations are as a community around these things. Particularly, we've got an issue of noise here, but I think it's gotten almost too specific now. Like we just really want staff to have a guideline that people who should know about it are aware of, and we can point to it or however. So I still don't like the motion. I like the intent, but I don't like the actual motion.
All right, I'm going to get to the calling the question here. I am going to speak to it though, because I think two halves of this. I really think that it's helpful for us to turn our minds to these kind of questions about what are the impact of our bylaws, what are the impact of these things, and are there ways that we upfront can help, you know, good neighbors wanting to be good neighbors do the right thing. I think that's all really positive. I just can't support the motion as it is. It's just a little too into the operational weeds for my take. There's many best practices that we try and get people to follow. There's many ways that we might engage to separate this one out and say we're going to have a council resolution that this one has to be distributed. It just does not feel right to me. It just feels like I think the intention of this is perfect. I just, as a governance body, I really struggle with us giving direction on one item just because it was on the agenda tonight. It sets aside all the other best practices and advice and discussions that staff that happen on a day-to-day basis. And I think fundamentally, philosophically, we've taken the approach with, as a council, with our zoning bylaws and things like that, that we try and make the zoning fair and reasonable and allow people to move forward with the development within those frameworks. And I think this is, sort of falls into the same things. If we have a problem with the citing or the pieces, then I think we should probably change our bylaws if that's the intention of council. I think right now we seem to have a reasonable approach, and I'm comfortable with. So I hate saying no to this one because I think the intention of it is absolutely fantastic. I just can't support something that is so niche in its direction and operational level. Any other discussion before I call the question? All right, all those in favor? And those opposed? I have Councillor Patterson, Watson, Braithwaite, and myself opposed. That does not carry. You had a second motion arising? Or a new motion under new business?
Yes, thank you. We've received several letters from the community on engagement with regards to the Haultain-Estevan Bikeway. And so I just wanted to test the will of council with a motion arising. So I'll read it now. That staff reach out to answer questions and receive feedback from the Chefe neighborhood group in advance of the Haultain-Estevan Bikeway returning to council.
Read it again, please.
That staff reach out to answer questions and receive feedback from the Chefe neighborhood group in advance of the Haultain-Estevan Bikeway returning to council.
Can I make a suggestion on that receive design feedback? I think that's just so we're not getting feedback across the board and all kinds of things. Okay,
yes,
thank you.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that motion? All right, moved and seconded. All yours, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. There's been a request from our community for more public engagement and thoughts on that perhaps the engagement hadn't been as inclusive as desired, and so I thought that exact question should come to the council table for discussion, and so I am bringing it up tonight so that it can be discussed.
Okay, thank you. And I think probably just worth clarifying the Chefe neighborhood group, I think refers to the area around Epworth and Haultain and Estevan kind of region. So go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks, Mayor. I thought that perhaps we had already chatted about this, but am I incorrect in that?
We certainly haven't, as a council, given any direction on this one way or the other. I think there's been discussion at the staff level with council, sort of informally, but there's been nothing at this council table. Other questions, comments? I might just have a question for the mover of this. Is the intention of this to invite for staff to reach out to specific people, or to just make an open opportunity for people to, along those corridors, to speak to staff, ask questions, and provide feedback on design?
Yeah, I wanted to leave the motion fairly open so that staff could judge things like location and capacity and method to not be too operational or specific. But just to give the council direction that we felt that community engagement was needed. And I suppose part of this is just me thinking ahead to our next meeting and keeping the process going. So from a perspective too of timeline and not wanting to see the whole active transportation timeline potentially slip away, should this engagement be directed by council to happen, I would love to see it happen as soon as possible so that we don't have to, say, go to another meeting to discuss this and then decide we want public consultation. So I feel like now is the reason I'm bringing it up as a motion arising is because I would love to stay on schedule with our active transportation plans while meeting the needs of the community.
Yeah, fair, thank you. I think just for my clarification as the chair adjudicating this, I wouldn't consider it a motion arising, but I do consider it a motion that has a time sensitivity to it. So consider it for short-term consideration. I'll turn this over to other members of council. Any discussion or questions? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can I just have the text of the motion read back again, please?
Councillor Smart.
That staff reach out to answer questions and receive feedback from the receive design feedback from the Chefe neighborhood group in advance of the Haultain-Estevan Bikeway returning to council.
Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate the clarification. Councillor Watson clarified the one word that sort of sticks with me a little bit is that we're talking about design feedback. I think there's probably an opportunity to extend an opportunity for folks to give feedback. What I heard during that discussion from folks in the neighborhood is that they had primarily safety concerns and some concerns around availability of parking, but a lot to do with traffic and safety concerns. We did, at the time of the discussion on March 10th, have a fairly significant discussion around there being a resistance to altering aspects, individual aspects of the design in exclusion of others. So I might be more inclined to support what's on the table if we weren't specifically referring to design elements, because then I'm concerned it's going to go into, we may be offering an opportunity or we may be extending an opportunity to provide information that we may not be able to respond to directly. Because especially at this juncture, because council has not debated that component yet, that component has yet to return to council. So that discussion around design and modifications to design and modifications thereof has not really been had by council. So I guess I can support an opportunity for the community to engage and speak specifically to some of their safety concerns that, in my view, are in a lot of cases potentially separate from the bike lane design. I'm just concerned about mixing those two things up. So I think that there's an opportunity to potentially engage the community to try to identify more specifically what safety concerns they're looking to address, which is what I heard at that last meeting. But modifying the design is something that council has not actually provided direction on at this stage of the game. So I just want to be clear with the community, if we engage those folks to talk about something, what exactly is it that we're offering to provide input on?
Go ahead to the mover.
Thank you. I appreciate the question. While it may not be the same viewpoint or perspective, I guess I was thinking that if there are safety concerns, they should be related to the design in some way. So while we're adding the word design to the motion, which I am amenable to have adding, even though I hadn't had it included originally, I do think that safety concerns, if they exist not in relation to this design, wouldn't really be the intent of the motion I'm bringing forward now. I did bring a motion forward earlier at the previous meeting with regards to having a potentially separate engagement project over previous concerns that exist in that neighborhood unrelated to this bikeway. But in this instance, I am particularly interested in things that would potentially involve further knowledge giving and therefore then further feedback that we could then have some of those more detailed design discussions at our next meeting. So.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion that's on the floor in front of us? Councillor Patterson.
Yes, Mayor. I guess on this, I'm in the somewhat of a difficult position because I can't support the what is being proposed, in that I think it's a bit siloed yet, and because there is another application that also impacts that neighborhood, and that is can't be totally severed from the bike lane conversation. Now that it's been presented to members of the community, so they are aware of it. It has been presented to the APC, who considered it and have made recommendations to council, but it hasn't actually come to council yet. And so until that happens, and I can look and speak to holistically what is going to be proposed for the neighborhood and the impacts on the neighborhood, I won't be supporting this motion, or probably any other motion to go ahead with the entirety of what was proposed for that cycling modification. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Don't see other hands at this time for the motion. Like all motions kind of that come like this, it's hard to think with all the ramifications thereof. I will, speaking to this, I think there's a couple of suggestions I might make. I think where I'm hearing this come from is that there was a robust engagement process undertaken on this, both from an initial design piece. There was a local ride and feedback, and there was a survey that went out that had the sort of high level design for feedback and provided that was available to everybody. In the course of that, some members of the neighborhood, you've identified it as a traffic. I think I would probably, to support this, I'd probably have to take out the specifically at that, maybe just neighborhood groups along the route, in case there's other interested parties on that. I don't think there were any others, but just in case. But I just think, from my perspective, this has the, I think anytime that people feel like their thoughts haven't been incorporated into a design, I think we have to take that, I think we take that. I don't think we want to be customizing on the fly our consultation process on every project in a way that is just responding to people's complaints if we had a robust process. This is the first one we've done, and so I'm a little bit more amenable to us taking a slightly more flexible approach to consultation if it gets us where we want to be. I don't want us to be raising questions when this comes back to council that staff haven't had a chance to consider. And so I would consider this to be an opportunity for those questions. They will come to council if we don't have them talk to staff to come forward. So I'm kind of I'm inclined here to support the motion. I'm actually not sure it requires a motion, but that's okay. I think we could probably have got there one way or the other with staff just working with the neighbors. But if this is going to be a motion at the council table, I think I really could only support it if it had a slightly broader opening for other people. I can think of perhaps Estevan Village and other people along that route that might want to have a say in this now that the detailed designs are out for feedback. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I don't think I can just support it with just the named neighborhood group. I think that's a little bit too narrow. If we're going to have it as a council resolution, I think it has to be a little bit more clear that others are welcome to attend that discussion as well. I do think the design feedback is important. I don't want this to be questions about the consultation process or other things. I think this is really just about if there's ideas, they want to share them, staff can listen and make sure that they're prepared should those questions come up at the council table, and perhaps answer some questions about why the design was done the way it was done, which is, I think, not an unreasonable ask. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I struggle with it as it is wording, but I think with a slightly broader scope, I'd be supportable. Councillor Braithwaite?
Thank you, Mayor. So if this failed, then would the request go to staff just to make some arrangements to do something similar to what we would like to see happen in that neighborhood?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. My interpretation of this is, we have a resolution of council that is to ask staff to meet with residents for a process outside of the original consultation process. I think if it failed, then it would be very difficult for staff to meet with members of the public on this one. I think we would almost be essentially a resolution requiring them not to meet with the public, because we've had a motion for them to meet with the public outside of the process, and we've publicly made a decision not to do that. So I think we're kind of almost the opposite. I think if this doesn't pass in some form, then it probably gives essentially clarification for staff not to meet with the public.
Then I would make an amendment, please, to include other neighborhoods along that cycling, along the bikeway route.
So I would just maybe suggest that it says, I think the wording was from the Chaffee neighborhood group, and just say from neighborhood groups along the route would probably be my suggested wording for the amendment. I guess this is, it's an amendment on the floor. I'm just going to see if there's a seconder. Is that a second? No. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Not at this time. Oh. Okay, seconded for discussion. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite. So I'm going to take the motion to change the language to from the Chaffee neighborhood group to, I think I got that wording right, feedback from neighborhood groups along the route. That's the wording I sort of thought of for that. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. I mean, I think that it's important to get the input, and if it needs to include the other neighborhood groups along the way, just to get this to happen, then I'm quite happy to support that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. As the original mover of the motion, I'm very supportive of broadening it, and I would have preferred that intent, but it makes the motion quite complicated in the wording that I originally had, because it was to have staff reach out, and they might not know who all the neighborhood groups are. So if we are going to be more inclusive, I guess I would suggest a rewrite. So I wouldn't necessarily be supporting the amendment, because I think it would be challenging to ask staff to invite neighborhood groups without listing all the neighborhood groups. So I'd be more amenable to rewriting it that staff welcome neighborhood groups to reach out to staff to answer questions, or something more along those lines, unless staff responds that they're entirely comfortable with knowing who they would reach out to.
I love wordsmithing on the fly. Right now we have an amendment on the, so I take your point. Councillor Braithwaite, instead of reach out, would you accept the wording of welcome in that amendment? So I would have that staff welcome to answer questions and receive design feedback from neighborhood groups along the route.
But sorry, Mayor, but does that mean that there's a meeting between staff and these groups, like, or is it all online and is it all by letter? Because I want the meeting to happen in person.
Yeah, I think the intention is it to be a meeting. That's the way I'm reading this motion, either way. We have a motion to amend right now to expand the original language to neighborhood groups. So I might call the question that if that's the intention of the will of council, then we can move that forward and we can have another amendment to change the language of reach out. But I'll take a motion. Comments on the amendment. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton and then Watson.
Thank you, Worship. So, you know, I can appreciate the efforts of kind of what's being attempted here. I'm not in support of the amendment for the simple reason that I think it absolutely should be broad, and I think public engagement should engage as many people as possible. We've had a public engagement process that's been very broad and has engaged a pretty broad sector of the community. In addition to that, with specific respect to the design of the bike lane, because we're speaking now to the design of the bike lane and feedback on the bike lane, I think it's important to reflect on the fact that I hear very strongly from the folks who live in the neighborhood that they have specific safety concerns, traffic concerns, and safety components that they would like to discuss. when it comes to engagement with respect, and I think that that's valid, and I think that it's possible to create a structure whereby we do that, we respond to that. When we talk about this broader engagement about the overall network, the overall bike lane concept and design, I think it's important to reflect on this is not just infrastructure for the immediate neighborhood, but for the entirety of the community. So everybody that will use that infrastructure within the community that will use, has a stake essentially in the design of that and would have something to say. And we've heard that from folks who came to speak to us here at council. So I think that if we're talking about the impact of the infrastructure, there will be a street level impact. There will also be a positive impact to mode share and the way that people in the community get around. So those are both factors in the overall design of the corridor. So I can't support sort of selectively adding groups onto the engagement because in my view, it's the entirety of the community that benefits by the infrastructure that's being put in place, and there are street level impacts. So I think getting back to first purposes, what I heard from the folks who came to speak to council from the neighborhood about their safety concerns was it was a very focused and specific conversation about design elements in the immediate vicinity of their neighborhood that they were concerned about from a traffic safety and just a general pedestrian and citizen safety perspective. So I think we're getting, what's on the table now is getting beyond that by quite a bit, and I would rather return to first purposes to talk to the Chefe neighbors about their specific safety concerns, which again, in my view, are somewhat not entirely divorced from the bike lane project, but in a lot of cases incorporate things which are not addressed by the bike lane. So I really do want to hear from these folks about what they would see being done differently for safety in their community, but now we're entraining a lot of other components with respect to consultation about the bike lane. So I feel we're diverging a little bit here with the language of the motions. And I understand the intention of everything that's being done, but I would rather see us return. I can't support the amendment that's on the floor. I would rather see us return to first purposes about consultation with the neighborhood about their safety concerns. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to make some general comments too about sort of back to first principles. And it was said earlier and correctly that there was I think the Mayor himself said it, there was a consultation process that was designed for this, and that we shouldn't be necessarily customizing it on the fly. However, so there maybe there's two options here that we could consider. If we heard specifically from the Chefe group about, as Councillor Appleton says, some very specific safety things. The fact that they're on the bike lane may or may not relate to those, but they want to be heard. We're learning how to do this. This is the first one of these projects kind of out of the gate, and going forward, maybe we'll do things differently. I don't know, but we are now in a situation where we have some dissatisfaction from a group of citizens who feel that some of their legitimate issues have not been heard. However, we also have some larger issues, and as Councillor Appleton has said, we've got lots of people, and this is not just about this very proximate community. It happens to be a route that is favoured for many good reasons, and has been designed to create broader amenity for not just Oak Bay residents, but cyclists more generally and the larger community. So I see two options: a narrower thing that really does just focus on the Chefe group to acknowledge those particular concerns of theirs that are outside the bike lane to some extent. Or alternatively, perhaps asking the design consultant to come back and hold a meeting where anybody could come with their questions about the design. And then you've kind of neutralized that cherry picking thing, like why are we talking to one community or not another? And then you might get folks who are living in the uplands who are not affected by this directly at all, who still have some legitimate questions. So it's so hard to be thinking about how to do this at the end of the evening. But I think there might be a different way forward too than what we're talking about right now. So in some ways, I support Councillor Appleton with his narrower look. Let's just talk to Chefe about it's a kind of different cluster of issues that they've been raising with us, and maybe that makes sense.
Thank you. I'm going to ask that we come to some, I'm going to call some questions here and get us to this. I do want to welcome Sarah, I actually don't know, is it Aiku? Who's our new, one of our new admin staff here. Mr. Dowling, it's his last meeting here with us tonight. I wanted to just welcome you and say goodbye formally to Mr. Dowling. I point that out now, I was going to do it at the end of the meeting, because we have some strange curse in this room where the first time someone from the administrative team has their first meeting, somehow we managed to have an abnormally long meeting and have ended up at like midnight or 1 a.m. We'd love to get out of here on time tonight. It's now 9:37. That gives us 23 minutes to resolve this on time, and we're down a rabbit hole of murkiness, and I want to get past it. So we have a motion to amend the current motion on the floor. I have a speaking order of very limited numbers. Councillor Smart, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate Councillor Watson's clarity on, two potential options that might move us forward, and I acknowledge that I'm not directly addressing Aaron Burdock's request to focus in on the amendment. I just wanted, if possibly through you, Mayor, to staff, just ask around when this project comes back to council, will it be coming to a committee of the whole meeting that we potentially could look at?
No, I can answer that.
Okay.
Because we could not come to resolution, I've announced I'll bring it through reconsideration process back to the table. It will come back to a council meeting, basically back where we left it, and I'll bring the motion back live at that point.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, I think that answers my question, and so I'm just going back. I guess with Councillor Watson, with your two kind of very specific thoughts on that, I guess the first option, I feel like I brought that motion up already at the last meeting, and it didn't. I don't feel like I could bring that particular topic up again because it didn't receive support at the last meeting. Okay, I won't be supporting the amendment because, as it stands, because I feel like, well, I like the idea of broadening up the engagement conceptually. I feel like really we have done a comprehensive engagement process, and the issue right now is this specific neighborhood and this specific knowledge being captured. So I won't be supporting the amendment.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the amendment? I'll say, having heard the arguments here, I will gonna vote against the amendment. I think the simplest path here is to just reach out to Chefé Group, have them have the conversation, leave it vague, you can argue about safety or other things, but basically just take feedback back. So although I suggested that I wanted to see other neighborhood groups, I do hear the concerns that expands it. And, I think this is just, we heard very specifically that they did not feel heard, and so this allows us to make sure that we're closing that loop. So I'm going to vote against the amendment as made, and then back to the main motion. So all those in favor of the amendment, which is to expand it to include other neighborhood groups, all those in favor? And those opposed? I have Councillor Watson, Appleton, Patterson, Smart, and myself opposed. We're back to the main motion, which is that staff reach out to answer questions and receive design feedback from the Chefé neighborhood group. Is that correct?
That's correct, in advance of the project coming back to council.
Thank you. I'm just going to put it out. Is that part of the motion? In advance of it coming back to council. Okay, I'm going to just throw that out there that I'm not sure I can, if the reconsideration may happen, depends how fast that can happen. I'm just not sure as a motion that staff have control over that, but we can do their best. Councillor Braithwaite?
I just want to make sure that that's an in-person meeting, please.
I'm just going to go to the mover. Is that the intention that it's an in-person meeting? Like not just a request by writing for feedback, but an actual, it could be virtual.
Yeah,
I suppose,
as I mentioned earlier, I was not going to prescribe the details, but to simply give the governance direction to engage and leave it up to staff with timing and capacity and how they wanted to deal with it.
So I feel pretty strongly that it should be an in-person meeting.
Well, I'm just going to turn this question. If this motion passes, as the staff reach out to answer questions and receive design feedback to staff, would they interpret that as a meeting, either virtual or in person, with the people to have a conversation? Would they see it as a seeking, sort of written input from people? I think there's a significant difference in terms of how that would be received. Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship. With the way the current motion is worded, so it's narrowed to the smaller group of people, in person is how we would interpret that.
That. So the motion is on the floor right now. Any other discussion? I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? None opposed. That carries. I appreciate there's some frustration with that thing, but we're at the point where we're at least given some direction and expectations on that front. Any other new business? Please not no. Okay. I am going to now move to next section, which is correspondence from other governments or agencies. The Victoria Family Court and Justice Committee, we have their annual report, so we normally just have a motion to receive this. Is it moved?
Motion to receive.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any discussion on it? I just want to thank Councillor Patterson for her hard work as our liaison for that. I know that there's a new person coming into that role, and you'll be acting as alternate and support for a bit, but thank you so much for all your time. This is an enormous amount of work that this body does, and you've been really instrumental in helping see it really achieve some significant improvements over the last few years. All right, I'm going to call the question on the motion to receive. All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? And then I move to 12.2, which is the Corporation of the Township of Esquimalt. Technically, what we do here is receive this correspondence. So I'll take that motion first, and if anybody else wishes to do anything else with this, I might have a suggestion how to do that reasonably effectively. Can I have a motion to receive? Moved, seconded, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed, not opposed? Is anybody interested in activating this? Yes, Councillor Smart. Can I just make a suggestion if there is a thing? I was going to suggest that if we wish to support the Esquimalt, that we have a motion along the lines that the mayor draft a letter to the province in support of Esquimalt's request to explore trustee electoral area options for School District 61. Is that Councillor Smart put her hand up, so I'll give her are you satisfied with something along those lines, Councillor Smart?
Yes, I just wondered if it would be CC'd to the superintendent of the school district.
It would generally be CC'd to,
Okay.
everybody.
Okay, then, yes, I'm very supportive of that.
Moved and seconded, thank you. Any other discussion on that? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, just to comment, I have had discussions with the person that had brought this forward to Esquimalt Council, and of course, having been our representative on Victoria Family Court Youth Justice Committee, I wish to remain neutral, as you should when you're on that body. However, I certainly support this because I think that it would provide an opportunity for more balanced representation on representation for the school board. So I'm supportive of it now and hope it goes forward.
Thank you. I mean, I will note the ask here is really just to have the province strike a task force and look at it, right, and just see if it makes sense. And it may very well make sense, but I think it's outside of our knowledge base to say whether it's the right or wrong thing to do, but I think supporting the process is a very good thing. All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. Welcome, Ms. Aiku. Nice to have you here. Mr. Dowling, best of luck with your new endeavors, and excited for you and all you get to do, so good luck with the move and everything else. With that, I would look for a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Thank you for listening to my pleas of advancing that meeting forward a little bit.